So thinking about logistics going into a company when you don't have any experience around warehousing, operations, or anything like that, you learn very quickly. But the way that we had everything kind of set up originally, in the first year, we weren't able to get source from suppliers. And so what we learned is the way that the industry was working is, you have to be a very established player, and they're very reluctant to actually give supply to certain companies because they want to protect the industry. And so again, it's about finding a solution around that. And what we did at the time is we would go to the local bookstore, buy the books because we would get a student discount, and then sell them. And so in the first year, we were able to recoup the return over rental, but we had to build as we went and solve problems as we went. And so how do you figure out logistics, and what does that look like from start to finish? It was very manageable when you have 100 to 300 books, not when you have $50 million worth of stock. And so it evolves and changes as you go. The way that we thought about it was what we built from day one. It was like, what does this look like if we were to become a $1 billion company, and how do you put the infrastructure and fundamentals in place for that to scale up? And so when you think about technology, you don't build it to solve the immediate problem. You try and think 3 steps ahead, 5 steps ahead, 10 steps ahead. And so I'll try and make this as practical as possible, but we would go and get the book, and then we would go and advertise it and market it. Again, even the advertising and marketing at the time was me going out and handing out flyers on campuses to get students to come in through the door, but I was still measuring the effectiveness of it. And so that was an important step that would filter through 7, 8 years later, which was how are we collecting that data, and how effective are we at marketing. Word of mouth was our number one contributor towards sales. And this is where the research element comes into it. We understood population density of students. It's not a product like you're selling a car and you got to try to reach the whole entire population at the point in time that they decide to buy a car. This was more of a pull product. So we weren't going out and pushing it onto students. Once we had told the right pockets of students, they were coming to us because they all had to get their textbooks, and they had a density population of all of them together at the same time. And so if you got one student on board, they'd go tell 3 or 4 students because they all wanted a bargain, and they would all come to you. And so that made it a lot easier for the marketing side, and we went and tracked that and built those systems into place in day 1 so we could use it in day 8. Then building the right sort of ERP software to be able to deal with the logistics of shipping it out and getting it back successfully, and what's a deterrent. And so we started looking at things like obsolescence rates, inefficiency ratios, to better understand the risk for students to not return the book in a manner that was usable to the next student meant they would get blacklisted on our site, which meant that they would lose a lot more money over the tenure of their course, not being able to use the service than it was worth it to just take the book. And then as we grew and brought new compliance and credit card and merchant facilities on board, we were able to have their credit card on file and charge them the total amount for the book. So for us, it worked out in a way. So these are things that you got to think about. When you build a product to scale out, you've got to go and play devil's advocate and stress test the system to try and break it as much as you can. And think to yourself, especially with students. Students like to get stuff for free and they don't like to pay for things. And so you got to go into the student mindset and say, if I was trying to break this system, if I was trying to take advantage of this, how would I do it? And try and break it, and then go and fix those holes and patch those up. And so we went along the lines of, every time we created a product, we were launching a subscription service, for example, and we were thinking of bundling shipping together. And we realized that students will go and get 10 or 15 of their friends and be able to put one purchase in, and we'd be significantly out of pocket. And so how do you then build that into your T's and C's? How do you find technical solutions for that? I was really lucky that I'd experience really varied across the board. So I've done business to consumer, I've done business to business at Flirtey, I've done hardcore hardware manufacturing where we were building carbon fiber by bringing glass together with different compounds, building from the ground up all the way hardware based, logistics, warehousing, dealing with a physical product, dealing with a digital product. And so I had a huge amount of varied experience across the board where I had to learn things really, really quickly to be able to implement that. And all of those factored into the decisions that we make. And so as we started building different products and services, we would take that depth of knowledge and then apply that to what we were doing and extrapolate it out and say, if this was $1 billion company today, how would the system work? How would it break? Where are the stress points? And build it in a way that it scales up, because a $1 problem when you're turning over $100 becomes a $100 million problem when you're turning over $1 billion. And so if you can solve that early on, it saves you a lot of grief later on down the track. So I hope that answers the logistics questions. Maybe I'll pass it over to the audience if they have any broader or specific questions.
Yeah, so does anyone have a business problem that they're having right now that they'd like Ahmed to help them figure out?
No guarantees, guys. Sure, do you want to?
Recognising that startups have limited budget to begin with, there is a choice that goes as opposed to focus inwardly, try to grow your idea yourself, or there is a choice to collaborate or JV to sort of leverage other people's expertise so that collaboratively you offer something that is far greater than the individual sum of the parts. Have you ever, what's your thoughts of that in the early stage of your journey, or did you go down that path?
That's a really good question. So to summarize, it's should you leverage partners and joint ventures early on and build into their resources as you continue to develop and grow, or go down your own path and develop to grow? I think it has to be contextual, so it really depends on what you're working with. If you have some sort of new IP that the world has never seen before, and you know that it's going to be a game changer for all these large corporates, I would probably continue to build by myself and leverage them for corporate investment. And a lot of the questions that you're asking, they depend on a personal choice. So I think when you start the company, you have to decide what you want that company to be, the values it stands for, and what it means, and that defines your journey. Because if you want to be really ambitious and shoot for the stars and build multi-billion-dollar companies, the chances are you're going to need external financing, which means that it already sets your path down the venture capital private equity path. If you think that there's a industry that can be done a lot better, and you want to control your own destiny and be in charge of it and build the kind of workplace that you want to come into every day, and that's the important focal point. And it's less about we don't need to be a $10 billion company, but I'm happy that I can take a holiday once every few months, right? And so it becomes a lifestyle business, lifestyle choice, and then you make different decisions based on that. Similarly, you control your destiny, and so the choices that you make are going to be dependent on what happens later on down the track. But if you know what your personal values are and you look at it from a longevity perspective, I try and make the decisions looking backwards. And so this is the point that I want to get to. Does this decision today help me get there or move me further away from getting there? And so would a JV, depending on the different controls you give up, or all sorts of different things, like what's to stop them from taking the technology and running with it in a much larger market if you do it too early versus doing it a little bit later. There's so many different variables that decision would have to be made at that point in time, taking into account all those things and working backwards from the end point. And it becomes a really personal decision and a level of risk whether you're willing to take it or not. And so my answer is it depends.
It depends on whether you're an invention or whether or not you're innovators.
That is a factor. That's a very strong variable around that, which is, what exactly is it that you have and that you're creating and you're working on? If it's some sort of new type of software that's going to help employees work better together, and you do a JV with, say, Suncorp, and they roll it out across all their employees, that could be very interesting. It could be very worthwhile. If you waited a little bit longer, got a use case, got 100 people loving it within the corporate system themselves, and you did a straight B2C approach, Suncorp might buy the company later on down the track. You might IPO, and so the end goal matters around how you think and approach that, but there is lots of different ways to get there. And so I think there's a start point, there's an end point, and there's 100 different ways to get there. And you have to decide the path on you want to get there. I try and go on gut feel. And so if I meet the JV and I like the partners, I trust the partners, I think they've got good integrity, I would choose to work with them because it makes life a little bit easier. If I get the wrong feeling, then I'd probably just continue down my own path and control and go from there.
Also, sort of part two of that question. So I'm now stuck on the part of a tech founder, and I'm looking at, I like people overseas. I think it's awesome as well. That's my sort of gut feeling. But the cost of an engineer here is $150 plus GST. Exactly the same skill set in overseas country, $15. So I can get 10 times the amount of work done, or 10 times the amount of people, resources, whatever you call it, by taking the risk. But obviously that also involves some risk. So again, is it a personal thing that you do, or what would you do if you had that same challenge where something somewhere is 10 times more affordable?
So again, to answer a little bit of context, I think the question is it do you outsource your development, or is it do you relocate your company to where it's more cost effective to run it?
With zero budget, so it's about giving away equity
Yep.
to a technical team
Yep.
that can help deliver
Your outcomes?
Yeah, your outcomes.
Is it better to take it abroad, or is it better to do it locally?
Obviously better here, but it's 10 times the price.
I see. So the question is, do you go for price? The way I look at things is in a triangle, right? You can either have price, quality, or speed. You can't get all three. You got to pick 2 out of 3, right? And so you're going to lose somewhere. And so I think it just depends on the circumstances. And so if you're in a situation where you don't have the equity to give or the resources to bring someone on board, that's the costing factor. You're going to have to look abroad, and then you try and do it from quality and speed, and try and find the person that's going to help with that. I think it again comes down to your personal decision when you're building for longevity. What does that company look like at the end goal? And working backwards from there, and being able to decide whether making that decision today, how is that going to affect you? Is that something that, well, we want to hit a certain milestone, and then we'll have the resources, the revenue to be able to bring that team in-house, and that'll continue down this trajectory because that's where our market is, that's where our customers are, and is this a temporary solution to get you to a certain milestone, or is that where you see the company scaling and growing and getting to where you want to be? So again, the answer is it depends. I'm sorry I can't be really specific without knowing the context of the company and the circumstances, which we'll take to cover. So I would base that decision on the resourcing that I have on hand today. If the option is you either quit and go home and it's done, or you outsource and you can continue to get to where you need to be to hit the next milestone, obviously I'll go with the overseas option, build it out cheaper, but get a really, really good quality product, prove it out with customers, hit certain milestones, bring in the resources that I need to bring on people in-house and get them excited. So if you're trying to convince a CTO to come on board and join the company, it's not enough now to just say, hey, we're going to be the next Google and come on board. Come with substance and say, hey, I've done my part. I'm a non-technical founder, but look at all these different goals that I've smashed. I've gotten signed up 5 companies that are willing to, huge big brand names that are willing to trial this out. We've got, XYZ. I've done the research. I've done the framework. Make yourself useful and show them, and they'll buy into that vision and they'll buy into that execution. And that's what you really want to get across the line, because it's not enough just to have a great idea, because everyone's got great ideas. Only a few of them are successful.
Cool.
As far as finding an investor is concerned, I realize that intellectual property and patent is an important part of it, that perhaps in your business it wasn't as important.
Yeah, this is...
If you don't mind, I will explain a little bit
Sure.
further so you answer probably the question. And that is that when you are presenting your prototype product, drone safety, for example, or passenger drone, that's my part, that I will probably let you know a bit later. But how can you qualify an investor? You remember you said in Los Angeles you had 4 investors, and you're saying, oh God, are they going to invest or not? And then the 5th one you were lucky. But inventions that are risky, there are other people that you are not sure whether they've got any money or not. How can you qualify them before they, I'm not saying stealing your idea and doing some modification and taking it from you?
This is an interesting question. So I get asked this a lot. Again, it depends. So I'm just gonna say it depends for all my answers, so I don't have to keep saying it. Yeah, it's all relative, right? And so, if you have something that you think is world changing and so unique, and you're the only person that can do it, if somebody else can do it easily, it's probably not that world changing, to be honest. You know what I mean? If all it takes is someone to hear your idea and they can go and execute it better than you, you probably weren't cut out for it in the first place. So that's the first thing, is you want to share your idea with as many people as possible to get as much input. And I'll tell you right now, professional VCs won't go and steal your idea. They're just way too busy. They're invested in way too many things. Like, they're not going to say, oh yeah, this is great, let me drop my fund and do what you're doing and compete against you. It doesn't make logical sense for them to get onto it. But how do you know that someone is a professional VC, or if you're speaking to someone who's not a professional VC, maybe an angel, you do a bit of background checks, you do a little bit of references, but if you have something that's patentable, so because we do two different companies in the drone business, we have patents. Now, that isn't our key success critical factor. That was just good governance, because we were inventing something totally new and we found 10 different ways to do something to meet a regulatory hurdle. We patented everything behind us as we went along, so it made it harder for Amazon or Google to just crush us. And so it was more just good governance than it was about our company is the patent. That's not really what it's about. Our company is the execution. How well can you get to the customer? That's the best defensible barrier that you have, because it's very difficult for someone else to come into that space and be able to upend you when you own the customer and you have that defensible barrier. So for the first part, I think if you're talking to investors and you're worried about them stealing your idea, if it's something that is patentable, it doesn't cost that much to get a patent. I would get the patent before I went and spoke to any potential investors if you did feel that you had something that was patentable. But my general view of the world is that patents is not really a critical success factor. To be honest, you can get the patent, it can be challenged in court, it can get crushed. Patents are a really good umbrella to prevent mutually assured destruction if you're going up against Google and Amazon and all the big players in the space. But if you're a small startup and you've got something that you want to use to change the world, your execution is going to be really whether you make it or not, the make or break. And so for good governance, if you have the resources and you're really working on something completely new, go ahead, get a patent. Whether you know an investor is real or not, do your due diligence, do your references. It's kind of like a partnership and a marriage, and you wouldn't go into that without knowing what you're getting into, and so you do your general checks and balances.
Just in relation to what you're talking about, all right, if the budget doesn't extend to a patent, but in your experience, would an NDA be enough to initiate those sort of conversations?
It's difficult to say, and I'm not a lawyer, this is my caveat, this is not legal advice, based on my opinion. So, we had an experience where we had a non-disclosure agreement with a different party, and they ended up launching a competitor to us. And we had the signed document. NDAs are not really enforceable in most jurisdictions and courts of law. And again, if you want to be really defensible, have really good execution. Because if your idea is just that, an idea, it probably won't get very far. If you have the operational chops to back it up, it's very hard for someone to displace you. And if they do, they're probably a lot better at it than you were ever able to be. And so I find NDAs tend to turn away certain people and individuals where, it doesn't make sense. If I'm an investor and I'm looking at a whole variety of different things, the last thing I want is I sign a piece of paper and you come to me and say, I've got an idea for a social network, and we're going to build it and it's going to be called Face Look, and it's like, well, this idea's kind of been done, but now I sign this piece of paper and the next 30 people that come and pitch the exact same idea, because you're probably not the only person in the world working on something. There's probably like 20, 30 other people if it's something really niche in garages hammering away at the same thing. The idea is not going to be your critical success factor, it's going to be your execution.
Yeah, I'm curious as to how you did the process you went through with getting your competitor overseas to fund another.
Yeah. Look, I think for us, it was meant to be a half an hour coffee, and it turned into a 3-hour lunch. They loved what we were doing, and basically for us, it was about, look, you guys aren't going to be in Southeast Asia or Australia for like in the Valley bubble. They view Australia as like this. Like it doesn't even exist in the world. It's like, what is that? And so we were like, we're getting really good insight into how the market is operating here. We're building the right infrastructure. And they had a history of buying companies rather than competing. So they would go down the acquisition path, and they view it as a really great way to get into this company and get data and insights and infrastructure before it got too big. And so that gave us really good insight into how they were operating and working in a good working relationship, and we have an amicable friendship. But they viewed it as like, well, we're not going to do this market for a very, very long time. And if we do this market, we're going to do the infrastructure spend and everything else. We'd rather know what's happening in the space and who the best people are operating and working in that space. And so that was how we managed to get them on board. And I think aside from that, they just liked us as people. We, easy to get along with, good to work with, and we did what we said we were going to do.
So that's still
yeah, good relationship.
Yeah.
There's been some interesting progress that I can't talk about right now. But yeah, I'm sure there'll be some good stuff happening in the near future. So.
As a founder, how do you reflect on starting a simultaneous another venture? So does it take a bit of a focus away?
Yeah, so very good question. I would not recommend doing that. So when the first company started, when the second company started, I actually got permission from the major shareholders, and I said, hey, there's this other opportunity for us to use it as a logistics service. And so we didn't think it was going to be a second company. We viewed it as a solution to solve our logistics. It's only when some of the biggest players in the market came to us and said, hey, we also want to use this service, that we said, well, this makes more sense to spin out into its own company. And I actually gave every single shareholder that was a shareholder in Zookal at the time shares in the other company. And so that was kind of a way to say, thank you for allowing us to do this, and that went on to continue to grow quite a bit. And so I'm lucky in that I'm on the board of directors and a co-founder now, and so I would attend board meetings once a quarter. It didn't really take up too much of my time, but you have 24 hours in a day. If you're working 16 hours, you get 8 hours. It just kind of switches your brain around, and both help and feed into each other. So a lot of deep insights and learning, because they're very different geographies, different shareholders, different board of directors.
I'll ask a few questions, but this one's related to share agreements. You've gone from founder of zero to something that's really successful. Looking back on that journey, if you could have changed certain things in the original shareholders agreement, what would you suggest to look out for those startups who are thinking of drafting one, but really don't know that journey that you've gone through, and what would you suggest to highlight?
Yeah, this is again a contextual question, and so it depends on how you view control and what's important to you. We took a more collaborative approach, and so the way that we looked at value is, we've given our lives to this project, and we've done all the time commitment and everything else, and certain people that have backed us have given their capital commitment, and so we view it as tying into working together as a partnership. And so what's more important than that is, rather than what's in the shareholders agreement, pick good shareholders, because you'll be able to, that's just a piece of paper that you'll continue to change as the company grows and evolves, and that's more around time, administration, governance, regulation. So as you become a bigger company, you're going to do more different things and tick more boxes. But if you pick the wrong shareholder, you're going to have problems no matter what's in that document from day one all the way through. And so it's really hard to walk away from money, especially as a startup when you need it, if it's the wrong person. And we've done this before, where we had a term sheet when we first started for $600,000, and we had a term sheet for $200,000. And we took the $200,000 term sheet because the shareholders were better. And we had a lot of red flags in that original term sheet, where they were implementing shotgun clauses and all kinds of stuff that I didn't even know what it was, but when I went and spoke to an advisor, they were like, there's a lot of red flags here. And we're like, well, this is the first piece of paper that you guys have brought to us as a working relationship that you want to work with us, and there's already problems in it. This is going to be problems for the next 10 years, and so go with the right shareholders every step of the way. And so your shareholders agreement will evolve, but they should be your partners. You're all working together to build something of value.
All right, Ahmed, I know you're short on time, so I might just sneak in one question at the end, if that's all right. You mentioned tenacity is the most important quality. So what are your recommendations for everyone here about how to kind of cultivate and develop and strengthen the tenacity? And what are you kind of doing to strengthen yours?
Yeah. I think it starts even before that. So when you're deciding to do a company and you're picking a space you want to get into and what you want to do, make sure that you're deeply passionate about the purpose and the clarity of purpose. And so that helps create tenacity. For me, it was always, and it's the same from day one, so it hasn't changed. It was, this is too important of a company not to exist in the world. Like, I really need to do this, because I was in that pain point and I was experiencing it as a student myself. And it was painful. It didn't make any sense to me, where it was like, I didn't have any money whatsoever. I had to fork out $400 to be able to get my educational resources, and the nature of the way that students are learning is evolving, and it's still catch up. And so to me, that was a really, really important purpose and vision that made me tenacious, in the sense that I wasn't ready to take no for an answer. No matter how bad things are, no matter how difficult things are, I would get out of bed every morning, jumping out of bed ready to go, because it was too important for me that this had to exist in the world. And so that's how the tenacity was built into it. So even before you start, if you pick something where you just want to make money, you're going to struggle, because there's no amount of money you can pay in the world to go through a startup, because it is a brutal experience. Like, you just won't last. If you pick something where you have clarity of purpose and you deeply believe in the vision, and it's so important for you that this exists in the world, you're automatically tenacious. It's just a secondary nature to you, because you're like, if I don't do this, it's going to affect millions of people all around the world. If we do this correctly, it's going to impact millions of people around the world for the better. That's really important to me, and that's my purpose. That's built into why I work, and like a whole entire deeper level of your own understanding.
Thanks, Ahmed.
Terrific. Thank you, everyone.
Well, I think we've all learned a lot here today. I know that one of the things I have to do after this is call the person running the Gucci store in the city and warn them they're about to be swamped by founders. So I hope this has been really productive. I realize I didn't totally introduce this space and everything that's going on here, because I sort of always think everyone here knows what this is about. So this is part of Western Sydney University. It's one of our 2 locations for Launchpad, and we also have an incubator accelerator type program called Sid West. So you can be involved in the space, you can be involved in our events, you can be involved in our program, and if that's something that's interesting to you, please go and talk to Beck over there, and make sure that you're on our list. We're drawing to the end of this sort of program now, but there's still ways to get involved, and you can still be part of everything that we're doing in the space. And we will have another one launching soon, right, Beck? That's the ish, maybe? Can I talk about that? Yes? Okay. There will be. Probably. All right. So make sure you get your name down and get involved. We've got an amazing space here. It's going to be growing. We're going to be getting more sites. So there's a lot happening here. It's a real kind of push up. And I think we're very fortunate to have Ahmed come here and show you, look, if you grow up in Western Sydney, this is what you can do. So, we expect a lot of you, a lot from everyone here. We'll be tracking all of you, and I hope you're all up here in, how long does it take, Ahmed?
7, 8 years.
7 to 8 years, you're going to be standing up here and telling the story yourselves. All right, thanks again, Ahmed.
Terrific. Thank you, Ben. Thanks, everyone.